Coming up on FaceTime.
Chen Academy, it's really interesting. It's gone through a lot. A worship hall, an academy, middle school, a printing factory, a museum. The details are unique. Wood carving, stone carving, Huang Ridge. What makes the place interesting is its survival as Guangzhou is constantly developing and changing.
Welcome to FaceTime, the expat talk show that features guests from all around the world. On today's episode, we're steering you away from the hustle and bustle of urban Guangzhou to experience the century-old Chen Clan Academy and its transformation over the past decades. But to give the old stuff a new twist, we've invited not a local, but a well-informed New Yorker to piece together the historic puzzle. Meet George McKibbens, expert in historic preservation and a part-time volunteer guide for the Chen Clan Academy.
The Chen Academy, it's really interesting. It goes by three names. One is陈家祠, which is the ancestral worship hall of the Chen family. It began as an ancestral worship hall. That's actually the name of the metro station here. On the one train, everybody knows that. Also the Keji Shuyuan, which is the academy to study for the imperial exam in the Qing dynasty. And now it is the Mingjin Gongyi Boguguan, which is the Guangdong Folk Arts Museum. And what it is it is a former ancestral worship hall that now functions as a museum.
And what are some of the changes that it has gone through over the years?
It's gone through a lot of changes. It became a middle school for a little while. It was a training facility during the Civil War, and also barracks during the Japanese invasion in Guangzhou after '38. And then what was most interesting during the Cultural Revolution, a printing factory. Right behind us is where Mao's Red Book in Guangzhou was once printed. And in the 1980s, it transformed back into the Folk Arts Museum. So it gets really confusing for a lot of people. It's an architectural relic, but it's changed so many times. It's what I call an example of adaptive reuse. Guangzhou is always changing. This neighborhood around us is constantly changing, but the structure that we see behind us is still in its initial shape, initial style from 1893 when it opened. This year it's going to be the 120th anniversary. So it's one bit of tangible heritage. When Guangzhou, there's not a lot of tangible history, even though this is a very old city, not a lot of history that you can touch.
Yes, and you mentioned it's an architectural relic. So
yeah.
What's special about architectural designs here?
Well, the architecture here is, the shape is just the same as most Confucian worship halls that you'd see all around China, but the details are unique. The wood carvings are local wood carvings to Guangdong province from Chaozhou. Now the stone carvings are also unique, and just at the top behind us there's a ridge. That's a Huang Ridge, also in the city of Huang. That's taozi, it's ceramics. And it's what's also called the Huaji roof. So these little details about the building are unique.
In 2011, George McKibbens volunteered to guide tours at the Chen Clan Academy and was the first foreigner to do that. Besides pointing out the beautiful details of the architecture, he also added many historical anecdotes relating to the structures, the time, and the people who built them.
You know, what's interesting about the touring that you did is you're not just introducing an ordinary tourist site, because it's a very important cultural relic here in China. So how do you prepare yourself for that?
Well, I try to make it, I don't want to give the same tour twice. First I introduce myself to the people, and then I try to relate the story of this place, from transforming from a worship hall, an academy, a middle school, a printing factory, a museum, and just tell the story and make the story interesting, is to get the narrative. A mistake a lot of people make when they come here, they think this place is 300, 400, 500 years old. It's actually not very old. What makes the place interesting is its survival as Guangzhou is constantly developing and changing.
So I guess some of the people who are watching our show might be asking, why should we listen to a foreigner telling us about this Cantonese relic while we already have local guides who speak English?
That's a good question. Well, a lot of people do ask that question, and oftentimes it puts me in a position to prove myself, that I know what I'm talking about or that I do proper research. But that's the game. I chose to live here. I chose to work in historic preservation, and that's the career path I've chosen.
And George did prove himself by communicating the fact that Guangzhou is not just a shopper's paradise, but also a city with a deep culture. Now he works as the director of research for the Guangdong Folk Art Museum, housed inside the Chen Clan Academy.
I'm leading a research project, which is an oral history research project. We are doing interviews, like you're giving me an interview now. We're interviewing a lot of people from the neighborhood. As the neighborhood around us has changed, we're trying to get a lot of stories from people to put together some missing pieces of the narrative. Particularly, we want to focus on the 1950s. There's not a lot of photographic documents about this neighborhood in the 50s, and particularly in the mid-1980s, when this place was transforming from the printing factory back into a museum that it is now. I want to get more stories about that era. I've talked to some retired staff and also a lot of people around the area, and the last bit we're trying to get is the Ya Yunhui story, very recent history, the last 3 years when this place was rapidly transforming for the Asian Games.
Yes, but that's only sort of a side project for you. Your real job is actually teaching history.
Yeah.
So what classes do you teach?
Well, I teach at Huang, South China Normal University, and this semester I'm teaching Sino-African relations. It's based on a paper I wrote last year, and also teaching Shijie Yiqiang, which is the preservation of world heritage. So it's introducing historic preservation to history majors at the school from a global perspective, different preservation cases worldwide. Last lesson mentioned Machu Picchu in Peru, the preservation issues of landscape preservation as well as urban preservation. Issues here in Guangzhou, preservation of places like Huangpu village and all of these things. And also intangible heritage preservation, language preservation, customs, these things.
In addition to that, George also designed a course entitled Chinese Cultures in China, introducing contemporary Chinese culture in the 21st century, particularly by looking into the post-80s and 90s generations. The class was welcomed by students and received many positive feedbacks from all around.
The class was made up of curriculum from the it was 80后和90后的文化. It was just for the 80s and 90s generation and how culture has changed so quickly. Basically, in China right now, we have one of the biggest generational gaps in the history of the world. People who were born in the 70s have a totally unrecognizable life to people born in the 80s and people born in the 90s. Then that's a reflection of hyper-development. And that's why people my students reacted so well to contemporary Chinese culture. And we're able to reflect and study on issues that have impacted their lives, a history that they've seen happen in their lifetime.
And that's how you keep people motivated, because obviously when we think about history, it could be very boring.
You know what is great is that 3 of my students from last semester have joined the research team, and with our spare time, nobody's getting paid to do this, so it's our spare time. We get together, we find photographs, we find documents, and we do interviews and talk to people in the neighborhood, and we try to put together a better narrative.
That's your way of influencing your students to do more, to contribute more.
Well, generally it's just to show people that when you study history, history is right now the least popular major for university students in China. Everybody wants to study business and finance, and ironically, Marxist theory is still a required course for people going into business and finance. Everybody's studying after they take the Gaokao, they want to make money, and then there's a small minority of people who still find history and culture and other humanities-related courses interesting. And what I want to show people is that there is a future. You can create a job for yourself. You can be creative and find a career in historic research, in historic preservation. That's where the future is. In a country that is developing so damn fast, historic preservation is not well established. The infrastructure is not there yet for people who want to preserve their neighborhoods. So that's where there is opportunity, and that's where my students get excited. It's when they see that they can take something they enjoy studying and turn it into a future, turn it into a career.
Yeah, and then speaking of how fast the country is developing, in an earlier conversation you mentioned you felt really fortunate about living in China at this point in time because it's a very unique time in history.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's unique? What's unique about this?
Well, this is a point in time where people are watching their neighborhoods disappear faster than any time in recent history in China, and then in the only way to compare China to other places that are developing almost as fast: India, Brazil, Nigeria. People are watching their communities disappear and transform really quick. And why I think this is such an interesting time to live is because I was born in 1980. I can go back to America right now and find the street where I grew up on, find the building that I lived in when I was a kid. You cannot do that if you are a kid in China today. You know your building will be gone, and you have a different concept of what history is. So the perspective of young people in China today is so important because they're witnessing something that their parents have not witnessed and have not understood, and it's really important for young people today to tell their own stories.
And talking about changing of the neighborhoods, I mean, a lot of that happens during the Asian Games.
Yeah. What's interesting about the Asian Games here at Chen is that the neighborhood around us, half of it was demolished, was chied to make a new plaza. And
how did people react to that?
Well, it's mixed reactions. This plaza now, it's quite nice, and it's used as public space. And what's ironic is at the front now there are two new stone carvings which have been excavated due to the demolition, and which we did not know were there. We actually found relics due to the transformation, and it's added new pieces to the story.
Very surprising.
And you know what is quite funny is that now the plaza outside in front of us is considered a historic zone, even though it's 3 years old. The archway in front of us, people look at it, tourists come and they take a picture. They assume that a big stone archway has an ancient presence, but the neighborhood that used to be there, that would have an older presence. That's gone, but people are interacting with this space, this big plaza, more than the neighborhood that was wiped out. So it questions what we call history. Is history something that happened or that had a long time span, or is history something that is brand new and people react to it and respond because they feel are close to it, that it's a representation of their culture? Development and then replacement of history that was lost, it's changing the way we understand history.
Being an expert in historic preservation, George also writes a column for the Chinese local newspaper, New Express, offering his insights on various hot topics, such as Weibo addiction, karoshi, apple maniacs, and ivory trade. But the topic that George finds most fascinating and frequently writes about has been housing demolition in Guangzhou.
I do want to talk a little bit more about the housing demolition because there's been some negative coverage about housing demolition in China, especially from Western media.
What a lot of foreigners don't really understand is the complexity of owning property in China. when you own property in China, you don't own it indefinitely. You are leasing it. You're leasing your land, your apartments from the government. Your property has a lifespan. And what's interesting about homeowners in the mainland is that most homeowners are first or second generation homeowners because private property was reintroduced in the 1980s. So a lot of people have been seeing the demolition of their homes as an insurance, as a sort of payoff. That's money from the government for their homes being destroyed. But what is not going to happen for the 80s and 90s generation is that young people today, one, are not going to be able to afford to buy a house. It's not going to happen. So you're going to see people renting on into their 30s and 40s. So young people today are not going to have that chai chen. It's not going to happen. You buy a house when you're 35, the lifespan of your property, what is it, 60 years? You will die. You're not going to get that chai chen that mom and dad were waiting for. So people are going to have to start learning to take care of their neighborhoods and start to value their neighborhoods. And when you see neighborhoods being demolished rapidly, it tells a lot of young people that their neighborhood, that their community is not important. And that becomes really problematic. People put development ahead of culture. And historic preservation has an opposite effect. It helps people appreciate their own culture rather than value the destruction of their own culture and the mimicking of foreign culture or the fast-paced development.
So from what you've seen, where does Guangzhou stand in terms of cultural preservation compared to cities like Beijing or Shanghai?
I think Guangzhou has done a pretty good job. And if we're talking about Beijing and Shanghai, Beijing destroyed itself overnight. Shanghai is a mixed bag. Shanghai has a good sense of preservation, an amazing sense of culture, bringing new culture. Beijing, what's quite interesting is that even though Beijing wiped out most of its old hutongs, now a lot of artists have recreated some new and exciting neighborhoods in Beijing. There's a lot of new graffiti in Beijing, which is appreciated. Guangzhou, I think, has not gone to the extremes of demolition as Beijing and Shanghai, but we've certainly lost a lot of communities that were valuable and are not coming back. If we could redo the Asian Games, we'd want to document the neighborhoods better. We'd want to take more photographs and interview more people, and we would want to, I think, do more careful planning. I think what's really important is we should look for adaptive reuse of old neighborhoods, ways to reuse old structures, and rather than completely destroying old structures.
What are some of the other successful examples of cultural preservation in Guangzhou?
A lot of private companies have set the tone for preservation. At the end of Beijing Road, Goelia has opened the art gallery out of the former photography store. The Goelia building is a great example of cultural preservation. They've renovated the inside, they've turned it into an art gallery. People come and they appreciate the space and they get really excited a way to reuse the space. Other examples of great preservation example is the Yeshu Stadium. In Yeshu Park, the old stadium that was built in the 1950s to welcome Khrushchev and Mao during the kind of pinnacle, the end of Sino-Soviet relations. That stadium was repainted and reused during the Asian Games. That was a great job.
If you could do something to help raise awareness of cultural preservation, what would you do?
Getting more people who are studying history getting excited about preservation is a way to go. Establishing a foundation, getting young people to realize that history is not something that they're forced to memorize. History is something that they make, they create. I'm not against development. I'm against fast, unplanned development. I want cities to be able to develop and maintain their unique character.
Oh, good luck with that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on our show. And thank you all for tuning in. Please email us with all the questions or comments you have for the show. And don't forget to check out our Weibo page for more updates. I've been your host, Sandy Huang, bringing you all the latest in China from GDTV World Headquarters in Guangzhou. Bye for now.
老城西关，旧广州的典型代表。西关小姐，广府文化的一颗明珠。黄山客赖少奇，少小离家老大回，玉满画坛再欲归。欲知详情，敬请收看本期《今日广东》。东南西北中，今日看广东。大家好，欢迎收看本期节目，我是康毅。实在广州这句话名扬四海，这说明广州的饮食文化是多么的灿烂。我们今日